Well, good evening and welcome to the launch of Christians in the Firing Line 2. This book, I'm holding in my hands here, the latest publication from Wilberforce Publications. We're very, very pleased to bring it out and launch it and make it available from today online, available on Amazon and other good bookshops as well. 10 years since we first published this book, Christians in the Firing Line, and 10 years on, another volume has appeared, Christians in the Firing Line 2 by Dr. Richard Scott, and I'm very pleased to welcome Dr. Richard Scott himself online with us now, the author of the book, and also Andrea Williams, Chief Executive of Christian Concern, is online with us as well. Great to see you both. Thank you for joining us. Richard, congratulations on getting this book out there and writing it. A lot of work has gone into it, I know. I think there's stories of, is it 21 different clients in the book here? Tell us about, you wrote this, the
Can
first
I just say, before we launch into this, I'm very glad that 1 decade later, we've got Christians in the Firing Line 2. What we really need, Christians in the Firing Line 222, maybe even 2002. The point is, there are so many stories to tell. But I am very grateful, Richard, that you are in our lives at Christian Concern, in our lives at the Christian Legal Centre. And I'm very grateful that Christians in the Firing Line 1 and 2 have been published because you've had the tenacity to do it. But there are at least 2002 books, I reckon. Are you ready for it, Tim?
I've only got one lifetime.
And listen, if you're watching live on Facebook or YouTube, we can see your comments. If you want to comment and ask a question of Richard or Andrea or about the book or something, then do put your question in there and we'll try and get to it. So, Richard, tell us about why you wrote a second volume of this, which finally got out 10 years after the first one.
Thanks, Tim. It's good to be here. I think really, I've been aware right from the beginning that there's so many cases, some quite high public profile, reflecting the workload at Christian Concern. So there were 3 main reasons I wrote the book. Firstly, because I wanted to know more about the cases. I'm interested in these cases. So it was a personal reason. Secondly, I wanted to raise public awareness. The public need to know what's going on, and we'll talk a bit about that later on. And thirdly, and I think really importantly, I wanted to pay testimony to the brave souls involved, the cases, who've really suffered for their faith in the UK, and also pay testimony to Christian Concern, who've not only supported me over the years, but supported all these people. As Andrea says, how many books could we write? And it's not just legal support, it's spiritual and personal support itself. So I've had that personally, and everybody else has in the book.
Fantastic. And you said you've had that personally, but perhaps not everyone watching will know that you have yourself been a client of the Christian Legal Centre, Christian Concern. Tell us about your own story in relation to that, Richard.
Thank you. Well, I'll try and keep this brief because I'm a bit of a frequent flyer with Christian Concern. I'm well known. You're probably fed up with me.
We could never be fed up with you. And I'll tell you why, Richard. Because you epitomise actually all the stories in the books, which is why you are actually drawn to the stories are all very different. But in the circumstances are different. People find themselves in different situations. But the common thread, the common theme is a passionate love for Jesus Christ. When the moment of testing comes, a desire to stand for him, to speak of him, believing in him, an absolute zeal for the Lord Jesus Christ, a passion for the Lord Jesus Christ, and a belief that Jesus Christ changes lives, and he's the best news, and he's good news. And that's what I love about you, Richard, but all of the clients in the books, and all the ones that are not in the books, in the other 2001 books that we've got to 2000 books that we need to write. So that's
Richard, tell us your story. Go on.
Thank you. That's very kind, Andrew. Thank you. Well, yes, it's a little lengthy. Here's a brief summary. I'm a GP in Margate on the Point of Kent, and in 2010 I first needed Christian Concern's help after a patient's mother complained after I'd seen her son It was about spiritual care, and she complained to my professional regulatory body, the General Medical Council. And he'd had a long and very complex mental health history. But essentially, after a standard Western medical approach, I asked him for permission to discuss how my faith had helped me at a time similar sort of age in mid-20s that he was at that stage. I was aware he came from a different faith. He'd said he'd walked away, hadn't helped him. So let me tell you how Jesus helped me and could, by extension, help you. He listened briefly and then stormed out, which was a shame. And then when he spoke to his mum the next day, she asked him how he got on. And he said, oh, the doctor just talked to me about Jesus, which was a frank lie. We've got a massive amount of information on the computer. But there we are. He complained to the GMC with his mum, and they took it on. So at that stage, when a doctor has a complaint, we all have professional insurers. So I contacted my insurance body, the Medical Protection Society. And essentially, they just said, look, our main job is to keep you in a job. Just admit you've done wrong, damage limitation. So I booted them straight into touch, because that's not the truth. And I wasn't interested in damage limitation. I was interested in, in God's word, getting out there, helping patients, which is what I tried to do. So I remembered I'd met Andrea 2 years previously at a Christian Medical Fellowship conference and said, I just might need your help one day. And she said, I'm sure you won't. Well, there we are. God was giving us advance warning. So I thought, I know where to go, Christian Concern. So I sought Andrea's help at that stage, and we had a 2-year battle. We lost, so I got a warning lasting 5 years from the General Medical Council. So that finished by 2017. Didn't affect my practice. No
Richard,
worse.
I'm going to interject here again. I'm making a habit of it tonight. But the reason why I want to interject at this point, because knowing you during that period, meant that I came to know what you were like as a doctor. I came to know how much your patients loved you. How long you've been in that area, in that practice. I came to know about your church. I literally met people who'd had addictions and had been turned around because Richard had looked after them, yes, as a medical doctor, but he cared also for the cure of their souls. He actually cared for them, and we saw lifelong dramatic transformation. So I saw this with my own eyes. This was a great doctor. This was somebody who cared for these people that came in front of him every day. So for that, again, Richard, I thank you for having the courage in all of these situations. But that was also very evident to me that Richard's practice and his love for his patients meant like people encountered Christ and were changed for forever, as well as being, by the way, a really excellent
and quite a lot of Richard, I think your patients have ended up joining your church and becoming Christians.
So, some did, not as many as you'd always want, but some certainly did. And in fact, I meet people subsequently. I met a couple of guys on the train recently who'd become Christians after I spoke to them. They said, we didn't listen to you, but we do love Jesus now. So I thought, well, I'm a cog in the chain. That's okay.
That's it, Richard. That's it. Exactly. That's exactly it, Richard.
So that's encouraging.
So to cut your story short, you've sort of been investigated a few times. The National Secular Society have had a go at you.
They have.
And every time we've managed to get you exonerated, I think, haven't we?
That was my first case. Then, I did. Andrea asked me to speak on the Radio 4 in 2019. There was a 10-week series, Battles That Won Our Freedoms, and week 3 was Freedom of Religion. So I talked about, I was interviewed, talked about what I do in clinic, pray for patients, and mentioned that even someone had come to faith that week in my clinic, which is very nice. Anyway, somebody didn't like what they heard on the radio, complained to somebody else, and sure enough, the National Secular Society get involved and whinge to the GMC. And that took 4 years until actually September this year to be dealt with. But with the help of Christian Concern, that was kicked into touch. Alongside that, I'd had one more patient complain to the General Medical Council, and I might say that's just been a big battle, which again, Christian Concern, in particular, Mike Phillips and Rob Smith have helped me with. And I got another warning in the summer, but they wanted to suspend me. I might say suspend me for talking faith to a patient who'd consented. He'd signed a consent form. It's unbelievable, really outrageous. Anyway, with the help of Christian Concern, all I got was a warning, which I think just helped the General Medical Council feel better about themselves. But essentially, hasn't stopped me practicing, and I spoke to 2 more people and prayed with them today in clinic.
Wow.
God creates opportunities.
National Secular Society, by the way, if you're watching and you put in another complaint as a result of what Richard has said just now, well, don't worry, because we're going to be there. Christian Legal Centre is right by Richard Scott's side every day for as long as it takes. Let me actually on that one as well, though, because that, the point is here, people may think that's hard to have gone through that and it took those years, but we had a big win in that case, Richard. We had a very big win. Okay, Richard, you may have a warning on your record and so on, but the truth is, much bigger than that is the finding in black and white from the General Medical Council that you are permitted as a GP to pray with your patients.
Absolutely.
And this is a really important win. It's been said by the General Medical Council. So again, National Secular Society, if you are watching, the truth is this doctors are permitted to pray with their patients, provided they do it in a way that's sensitive and appropriate and so on and so forth. So, that is the reality of Richard. And just he believes that prayer works. He believes that people need Christ. And
we've seen it.
We've seen evidence of that.
Yeah, we've seen it. Absolutely.
Yes. So Richard, you've told here in this book 21 stories, different clients. Did you get to meet them all, and what was your experience of that?
Sure. Well, I've interviewed all the major cases because the book's really divided into two parts. Well, major cases and then street preachers, where many of the stories are reasonably similar. And so what I did as every single major case I interviewed. In fact, we've got some more cases for the next book already interviewed because stuff happens. So that's number 3 coming up at some stage. Right. But the street preachers, rather than see them individually, I went to see Mike Phillips, my barrister and their barrister, because he's dealt with all of them, knows them all intimately. So I got the information from Christian Concern, if you like, the legal cases, talked to Mike, and then we summarized them, just a sort of page each on each of the cases, because there are some similarities. And then did a postscript at the end looking at street preachers, because the issues are considerable. And I might say the results are very good. All street preachers get off with Christian Concern's help, because the police haven't a leg to stand on.
I want to come on to that in a minute, but so I think there's like 10 major cases then where you actually met the clients in person yourself. Yes. What were your impressions of these people who have sometimes lost their jobs, or been disciplined or whatever for expressing their faith? How did you find meeting them?
Well, just I think summarizing to 3 points. Number one, everyone was impressive. Every single one impressed me. Their stories, you think, my goodness, wow, they've gone through a lot. So the point number 2 is they struggled. It's a major struggle. Having a case against you at work, whether you lose your job or suspended, blacklisted, whatever, it's a big struggle. And that's why they need help, because they're clueless legally. All they know is, oh, my goodness, my job's on the line. I'm in trouble. And number 3, and the most important thing, is that whether or not they lost their job, won their case, whatever, all of them did well spiritually. Every single one said, my faith has, risen to another level. And actually, I remember just reading through the book again today. One person said, I'm so glad I went through this. Now that's hard when you read what he went through, but that's what he says. I'm so glad I went through it, because spiritually I'm in a better place. And when we stand up for God, God doesn't wander off and have a flat white. He's there. He's there working with us and working with Christian Concern.
Certainly my experience is that none of our clients ever regret having taken a stand and been uncompromising in their faith. Was that what you encountered when you met these people?
Absolutely, without a single different person. Every single person said, I'm glad I did it.
Yeah. And Andrea, what's your thoughts about the clients? So you've personally been involved in their cases and through their struggles and pains and all of that, and obviously you've been a fantastic help and encouragement to them all. What's your impression of these people?
And I have to say, it's now with as Richard has said, it's with an extended team now. Once upon a time, in a sense, work. I remember the days when it was kind of just me and Paul Diamond and Libby, but now we've got a full-time team of lawyers, 8 lawyers. We are, Richard there has given a shout out to Rob and to Michael. And I'm so grateful for Rebecca and Izochi, Ali Reza, for Pavel, for Nevade, for Bruno, for the men and women that are at the heart of this work day in, day out, and also the media team that support them. But we have a big heart for the clients, for these people that have stood for Jesus Christ. And and our job at the Christian Concern, the Christian Legal Centre, is to say, we're going to walk this path with you. You'll go walking into the lion's den. We walk into that den with you. And we will do all that we can with our legal expertise, with our media expertise. And because we love Jesus as you love him, we will do all that we can to the very best of our ability to stand with you. And we know that we need to take the financial burden from them, because one of case tactics is to come against people and say, we're going to take you for costs. And this just puts absolute fear into people. So again, we stand by faith. And we often say standing is winning. So the point about Richard's case, this last case, is that, yes, the GMC may have been grumpy and given him a warning when in fact he did nothing wrong. That's the truth. But what have we won? We've won in black and white a judgment, a recording that says doctors can pray with their patients. That's a victory. So, and you know, these cases, they all build. When, you know, with our 2002 books or stories, the point is this all builds to show what life is like for Christians that are prepared to really stand. And the thing is, I think it also acts as a way of encouraging people to be brave. Because because all of these people in the book and all of the many people that are not in the book, they all say we would not have changed it. We would not have done anything different. We are, you know, and because God meets you supernaturally in these situations, you see him go before you. And that's real faith. That's real life. I think you're right, Andrea. Standing is winning, but also actually looking at the cases in the book, I mean, every street preacher's been cleared, and most of the other cases, they've been vindicated, and in some cases they've been vindicated, I think, slightly since this book went to print. But not all of them, and some of them, they haven't been vindicated, and they've had to go on to other jobs and other careers and things like that. But even then, they still don't regret the stance that they've taken, and that's really powerful and very encouraging in relation to that. I want to highlight just some of the comments actually we're getting through here. Michelle McConey on YouTube, good to hear Richard speak again. Read his first book. Thank you, everyone at Christian Concern, for standing up for what's right. Thank you very much, Michelle. And Alexandra Teng, brilliant job, Dr. Richard and Wilford's publication on the sequel, demystifying the legal and medical vernacular that we often get entangled in. Telling stories it's rarely told to the public. And actually, that is a good point, Alexandra. It is very readable, this book. It's like telling the story. It's kind of like mini biographies, mini biographical sketches of the clients, and very, very readable, and doesn't get into technical legal stuff and all that kind of thing. So
I think that's important. You don't have to be a lawyer to read this book. You don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to be anyone, because these are human stories with a legal aspect
and spiritual stories as well. Now, stories. Richard, one of the things that connects these stories, both the street preachers and the rest of the cases, almost entirely, is freedom of speech. They've said something, or in some cases posted something on social media and expressed their faith in what they've said or written, and then got into trouble for it, whether it's with the police or with their employer or somebody else. Tell us about your view on free speech and the importance of that in relation to expressing Christian beliefs.
Well, it's absolutely vital. I mean, look at countries where they don't have free speech, and my goodness, we don't want to lose it. That's one of the best things about England, but it is under threat. There's no doubt, and that's why we have to make a stand. Because if we don't make a stand, you bet your bottom dollar where free speech is going. And I think that's really important in all of our cases. I can certainly think of my case. That's one of the things we say. Look, not only we've got, is there freedom of speech, but there's freedom of speech to speak about religion. We have still got the European Court of Human Rights. We can bring out Article 9 and 10. We've got an opportunity to speak freely, and we must take it, because if we don't, boy, it'll be lost. So we need to stand on what we have.
People don't think this can happen in the United Kingdom, and people, despite these books and despite the 2002 stories of Christian Concern, the Christian Legal Centre, people still don't believe that it's really happening. They somehow still believe that we're a bastion of free speech, when in fact what we've allowed to happen in this country is we've allowed in some ways the lights to go off, and we've also self-censored. So I just want to say to the viewers out there, I want to say, how often is it, like in your workplace or as a result of things that have come in, are you self-censoring? Are you not speaking of Jesus Christ? Are you not speaking about what you really think? Perhaps when you're asked to put pronouns on the bottom of your signatures or wear a rainbow lanyard. Perhaps when someone is hurting, when you might want to reach out to them with the hope of the gospel, give them a Bible, pray for them. Are you self-censoring? Are we living in a country of fear? Well, I think that we are. And I think the reason why the people here get into trouble is in part because they overcome their fear and they speak of Christ in these particular moments. And so, I mean, I want people to keep their jobs, but I want also Christ's name to be made known in the public space. And I think that unless we speak of him, and unless we have these cases, and unless we turn it around very quickly, then we're going to see more cases, and simply it's going to be prescribed. You cannot speak of Christ. You cannot pray. You cannot hear about a Bible.
You're right about self-censorship. And actually, one of the things I try to tell young doctors and teachers and others is, first of all, find out the rules in your organization, because many people think, I can't speak, and say, well, actually, that's not true. Find out the rules. As long as you can, where possible, stay within the rules. There are times when I think we have to break the rules, especially if the rules go against the Bible, then that's clear, our ultimate authority. But most of the time we can do what we do within the rules. So find out what the rules are. Don't just listen to other people or even your inner voice saying, oh, doctors can't, nurses can't, teachers can't. Actually, there's an awful lot that you can do. And
but
as
also
Andrew
remembering,
says,
Richard, because this is the call of the book. The call of the book, but in a sense, the call of the book is, these are testimonies, but we want to say to you, men and women of God, we want to say to the world, this nation has been shaped by the gospel. Our medical profession, our education sector has been shaped by the gospel. Florence Nightingale, for instance, would hand a Bible from what the matron would hand a Bible to the next matron on shift. Imagine that image. And how I would love to see that returned to our hospital, his name made known in that way, the Bible being on every bedside in a hospital. Well, why not? Let's imagine things differently, because wouldn't hospitals be a happier places if the Bible were deeply infused in the culture? There's nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing to be frightened of. All we have is territory, in a sense, to win for the gospel.
Yeah, fantastic. Richard, so you mentioned already that the final part of the book, I think it's 4 parts of the book, there's showing faith at work, same-sex relationships, as in issues relating to that, pro-life, and then street preachers. And you've got about 10 street preacher cases in there. And some people sort of express some sort of dismissal of street preaching and don't think it's really the right way to do it or whatever. You've written a little postscript to the book about street preaching, addressing that issue. Tell us your thoughts on that.
Sure. Well, I think this is an important one for Christians to grasp, really. When we look at the street preachers in the book, all bar one were arrested for talking about 2 subjects, same-sex issues and Islam. The last one was actually on noise disturbance, so maybe his microphone was a bit loud, so we'll leave that one alone. But same-sex and Islam are the 2 main subjects. And I suppose the first question that arises is, bearing in mind that these are potentially inflammatory subjects, is it wise for street preachers to tackle them? Especially for microphones involved. I mean, their bravery is not in doubt, but technique and tactics we could wonder about. And I am quite aware that many believers dislike this approach. But as a GP who's also an evangelist, and I've done a lot on the streets, I know the stuff on the streets makes a difference. I've seen it door to door. I've seen it elsewhere. I've seen people sing on streets. I've done it myself. You may not like the technique, but you can't argue with the fact that it makes a difference in some people's lives. So, yes, tactics are, we could discuss, but I think, it's a bit like the people praying outside an abortion clinic. Maybe you don't choose to do it, but we must uphold their right to do so. And the challenge to the rest of us is, okay, if you're not doing that because you don't like it, what are you doing? Because this is that the street preachers, no doubt, are standing up to God. So that's the first thing to say. I think the second thing is on the police response. And we, Article 10 gives us freedom of expression. The Public Order Act is, maybe a little bit more problematic, but, it's a criminal offence to use insulting or abusive words. But that's highly subjective. And there is a need to balance the public order and free speech. And of course, Lord Waddington in 1986, his clause allows preachers to criticise homosexuality. And he also urges listeners that, you can refrain without breaching Section 5 of the Public Order Act. So there's legal protection for street preachers. The problem is, and sadly, the police often ignore this free speech clause. So they arrest street preachers. And that's why Mike Phillips is quite busy, because he defends him, always wins, and the police always lose, and then they end up paying compensation. The police need to wise up.
They always lose, yes, and we have obtained quite a lot of compensation.
We have obtained compensation.
Not just street preachers. I think in the last year we've obtained something like £500,000 of compensation for our clients.
Really? I didn't know that. Oh my goodness!
It's an extraordinary figure. I mean, it's because people are abusing the law, or they're arresting or mistreating people, and the law does protect people's free speech.
It does,
whether it's on the streets or in the workplace, actually. And so but people believe that if you're offensive, it's an offence. Well, that's not correct.
That's not correct. And I think the last thing to say on the street preachers is, of course, they must stay within the law, and they must always do it in love. That's crucial. I believe they do. Certainly, I've met one or two of the street preachers, and not least Mike Overd. And he's got a real heart for people. That's why he does this.
Such a heart.
It's risky. It's challenging. He gets a lot of abuse, but he does it because he cares.
And in the Mike Overd trial, I was there. I was there, and the court staff were being really provocative. They had rainbow lanyards on. There were rainbow mugs. Really? This was at the appeal stage. That it was in the Crown Court, and there was open hostility to him. Yeah. When he went into the witness box, he essentially gave the gospel to that courtroom, and I have felt the power of God in that room. I felt the power of God in that room. I had never heard I have heard the gospel preached powerfully. That day was as powerful as I've ever heard the gospel in that room at the Crown Court. And then he didn't finish there, because when we went outside and the camera crews were waiting, he preached it to ITV and BBC, because there's no stopping him. And this is the thing with these people. Very often with
he's radically saved, isn't he? He was a soldier and what kind of stuff.
Radically saved. And Tim, today in our office, today in the office, the day that we're recording this, the day that we're launching this book, the latest street preacher has come in. But do you know what his story is? He found Christ in prison. They asked him, do you want a book? And he asked a religious book, and he said the Bible. He received the Bible, and he heard a voice that said, be still and know that I am God. So this is an Indian man who was heavily into crime and in and out prison. He heard that. He looked up where it comes from. I think it's Psalm 42. Be
46.
still.
46.
Be still and know that I am God.
Yeah.
And he then has this extraordinary testimony of change and transformation. When he came out of prison, the shock for him was, why are all the churches lukewarm? I've been radically saved. I want people to know Christ. How come everything feels compromised? He's now in a great church. But that was his story to me today, and I was so moved. But the point about him is that he's now getting arrested for the right reasons.
Except I presume he shouldn't be arrested because he's not done anything wrong.
Isn't that fantastic? I obviously didn't know that until now. Sensational.
We've got a question here, Andy. This is for you or for me. Kathy Walton. Are Christians and Muslim preachers both arrested? Well, I would say that Muslim preachers are only arrested when they incite violence and call for jihad and that kind of thing. And you don't see them getting arrested for saying, for insulting Jesus or whatever else they might say, that kind of thing. or criticizing sexual relationships or whatever either. But you do see Christians getting arrested for not inciting violence, but for criticizing homosexuality or Islam and this kind of thing. And there does seem to be a double standard here, and in many other areas in policing. Would you agree with that, Andrea?
Oh, absolutely. And I think we only have to look at what's happening on our streets again during this time in our history as we are recording this. Street preachers saying that which is biblically true and very peacefully contending in the streets are arrested, locked up. But we see people calling actually for death and violence and promoting Hamas on the streets of London. And they are protected. Let's look at the case of Precious Hatun Tash, Speaker's Corner, radically saved from Islam, a very fiery evangelist who sees many people come to be saved, but her life has been at risk.
And people assault her and knock her over and steal stuff from her, and they don't get arrested, and she gets arrested and then she gets cleared, and then they have to pay compensation because she's been wrongfully arrested. But they don't arrest the people who assaulted her and threatened her and all that.
And I just want to elevate this again. I mean, I want to elevate it because these are not human stories. These are God stories. And ultimately, these are testimonies of where the battle rages for Christ's truth in this nation. It's a story. It's a spiritual battle, and these are the micro stories of how it's being played out, where people have stood. And the only way in which Tim's comments just now make any sense is why is it that pride can parade the streets? There can be all kinds of behavior that the police are told to turn a blind eye to. We've seen this. We've got the evidence for. They're told to turn a blind eye to minor violence, lewd behavior, these sorts of things. That happens for Pride Parade taking over the streets. This happens when support for Hamas takes to the streets. But speak of Jesus, speak of Christ's truth, then you get Christians in the Firing Line 2002 version. Yes, I mean, this is actually what we get, because ultimately these stories tell the big story, the universal story, the one true historical story of a savior that loves, that died for every individual in that book, and they love him so much that they will stand in the moment when they're tested. That's the story of this book.
Richard, I wanted to ask you this question because you've got a number of different occupations in the book here: nurse, teachers, prison worker, magistrate, and various others. But actually, what struck me was most of them in the public sector and not in the private sector. And I wondered if you thought that was an issue, that the public sector Christians are more exposed, or there's more anti-Christian culture in the public sector, perhaps, than the private sector or even charitable sectors.
Yeah, I mean, I'll give a very short one-paragraph answer on this, and I'd love to hear what you think. But yes, I think that's absolutely right, because what the book shows is what's happening. It's an accurate reflection of our society. I think I've worked in charities in this country and abroad. I think there is more tolerance in charities. Certainly the ones that I've worked for tend to look for the best in their colleagues, not the worst from their angle. I haven't got experience of the private sector, but suspect there's more freedom in the private sector to be an individual with less restrictions, less, if you like, formal corporate rules. So I think, yes, it is tougher for Christians in the public sector. But yeah, I'd love to know what you guys think as well.
Andrea, would you agree with that?
I think overall we've seen it because the cases have been more in the public sector because the government reflecting the culture and heavily lobbied by particularly recently LGBT, in the last 20 or 30 years, LGBT lobby groups such as Stonewall have taken on this agenda, have been given hundreds of thousands, millions of pounds to promote a so-called inclusive agenda, a so-called tolerant agenda, which is in fact deeply intolerant. It's the intolerance of tolerance. That's true. But let's not forget that Barclays Bank are closing down
Mike Davison,
Christian bank accounts.
Yeah.
So we're seeing that kind of thing happen, where people want to run independent businesses such as counselling. The regulators, it's government regulators, are shutting them down so that they can't run their businesses. In the private sector, there is it's not that there is not a push for inclusive LGBT. They're very often the sponsors of some of these, major pride events and so on and so forth. But we don't seem to have had the cases in the same way.
Yes. Although there was the case of the lady, I forgot her name, who worked for the housing association, wasn't there? That was private sector, I assume.
Yes. Well, Maureen Martin.
Maureen Martin, that's right.
Who as a result of her political manifesto as a Christian People's Alliance candidate, stood for mayor, said that she believed in marriage, and yes, it was a private housing association.
So we have had cases in the private sector as well, but a lot of cases amongst teachers and other public sector areas, and that does seem to be the front line of this whole area, doesn't it? Andrea, you've kind of alluded to this, but here we are, 21 cases, and even since Richard wrote this book, there have been literally dozens more cases, haven't there? And we
have 1,000, Tim. We have 1,000 case inquiries every year. It's and part of my challenge in my role at Christian Concern is, how do I get people to understand, to draw up how Richard as a doctor praying for a patient is about the gospel, just as street preaching is about the gospel, just as a teacher being concerned about a little boy identifying as a girl aged 8 is about the gospel. How do people understand that the work of Christian Concern and the Christian Legal Centre is gospel work, because we're wanting the proclamation of the truth, Christ's truth in all of these spheres? That's one of the challenges, because so many cases are coming at us that we are dealing with day in and day out. We have a new line of cases is where faithful ministers of the gospel within the Church of England and within the Methodist movement are finding themselves in trouble within the church hierarchy for speaking the gospel. So
Andrew, there's a very good question there linked to this. Sorry if I could just take over Tim's role for a second.
You know what? That would be, Richard, that would be a great book. The Christian ministers in so-called Christian organizations being punished just for being biblical.
Like Bernard Randall.
I'll sign my excommunication notice right now. No, there's a question here, Andrew. It says to Paul, maybe Andrea could talk about helping people through these situations. How do you help them? Because all these people are coming up 1,000 a year. Briefly, how do you help them? What do you do?
Well, we help them because we take the issue seriously. We do all that we can, humanly speaking, to keep them in their jobs. That's the first thing. We link arms with them. We say that they don't have to pay for anything that they do. We're a ministry that's massively undergirded by prayer. We will take the hit against them if costs come against them. We tell their story. There are many stories that we don't tell, but if we think it is the right thing to do in order to help the case and public knowledge, then we actually tell the story. So we're pouring our lives into serving the people that come to us, so that they can continue to live their lives for the glory of God in the public space.
And there's emotional support and spiritual support and prayer support and all of that kind of stuff as well, which I think you will have experienced yourself, Richard.
Yeah, and also meeting other clients is also very, very encouraging. I'll be honest. You realise you're not on your own. You're not Elijah thinking actually there's 7,000 others, or certainly 1,000 a year others.
Well, I think I want to say to the church, Richard. I want to say to Christians out there let's stand with one another. And within your churches, at Christian Concern, we are so concerned to be the most encouraging people in our local churches. But we want to say to our church leaders, you are so critical to giving people the courage to stand for Christ in their lives every single moment of their lives. So come and stand with us. So that's another thing that I think we want to say. We want to say to the church, this is what's happening. Be bold and be strong. Do not be afraid. So we want to strengthen the church in this regard. And I suppose what else I'd say, Richard, is that this is a massive faith walk. So again, for anyone listening to this, if you're moved by these stories, if you're moved by the work, then one of the most meaningful things that you can do is to actually partner with. And we cherish every single penny because it helps people like Richard to stand with Richard for the past decade and all the stories in the books. But everything is meaningful. And particularly something like a £5 standing order, a £50 standing order per month, a £500 standing order per month, whatever you can give is cherished by us to make this ministry go round. It's the miraculous provision of God. But that's another thing I'm just saying to people that are viewing this, that we really cherish that, but we also really need it.
So, Richard, to close, why would you say people should read this book?
Well, I think, as Nicky Gumbel once said in Alpha about reading the Bible, well, it's such a good book. It's a good read. I hope it's a good read. You don't have to be a lawyer to enjoy it. That's the first point. Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, Christians have a duty to be informed. We can't be ignorant. I think it was Wesley that said, hold the newspaper in one hand and the Bible in your other hand. We need to know what's going on in society, and and also in the Christian world, not just in the Christian world, but also we need to know what Christians are going through. And that leads to my third point, which is once people are informed, they can then pray for the people involved in the book and pray for Christian Concern. And then I think fourthly and lastly, maybe even the most important thing, I hope that the readers will be encouraged and stimulated to join in themselves. Lay your colours to the mast. These cases aren't the great and good of Christianity in this country. They're not a gold standard. They're not the premiership. These are normal Christians going about their normal business. And they find themselves in the limelight uncomfortably for the great majority, limelight they didn't seek and through no fault of their own. But they'd rather fight than flee. They'd rather hold their ground in God's kingdom, because that's far more important than their own financial security. So I think really those are four reasons. Be informed, it's a good read, but pray for everybody involved. But be encouraged, stand up, because as we said in the first,
I think be inspired as well.
You could be next.
I think be inspired really by people who are uncompromising in their faith, who've got hearts of gold, who for whom loving Jesus and following Jesus is more important than their job.
Sure.
Which is a big deal. Andrea, any final comments from you?
These people are the real deal. They really love Jesus, and that's infectious. It's encouraging, it's emboldening, and we want to see the fire of Christ in every sphere of culture up and down this nation. Let's keep that fire burning. Let's keep that, the flame of Christ, the power of Christ, the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. May we see it. May we see it all across our nation. I thank God that he never lets us go. And this is it's such a testimonial, this book.
It is, yeah.
It is.
And so we thank God for that. So thank you, Richard. Thank you, Tim, and for all the work that you do at Christian Concern. Thank you, Team Christian Concern. Team Christian Concern, you are amazing. Christian Legal Centre, you are amazing. It's my whole life. It's the honour of my life that the Lord would put me in the midst of you all. Such amazing people doing incredible work because you love Jesus.
Well, Andrea, the biggest thank you has got to go to you for setting up this ministry and founding it and leading it for so many years, 10 years plus now. And it's fantastic. Thank you, Richard. Volume 2, Christians in the Firing Line. It's available on Amazon, Kindle or hardback, because I've got here. if you go to wilberforcepublications.co.uk, it's featured there as well. And thank you for joining us. I hope you found that an inspiring and useful conversation, and as interesting as I did. Very engaging. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Andrea. And thank you for watching, and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.